browsing.
So I know I'm excited to see all these new faces. An exciting day for you ahead. So we want to start off first by introducing ourselves, and then I'm going to put a few questions out to you, and then we'll get started. So I'm Valerie Perry, and I am the regional manager for a program called Adoption Journeys, post-adoption services. So I get the opportunity to talk with all the experts, all those families out there that have started, who have been on this journey that you eventually are going to take. So I'm going to bring my knowledge from those families to you. But our rest of the folks are?
So I am Heather Whitcomb. I work with the Department of Children and Families. I have been here probably about 20 years now. Have worked in adolescents. I switched over to adoption for about 6 years, and now I'm working with the ADLU unit, which is the Adoption Development Licensing Unit. So any of you that are going through home studies in Central Region, either myself or my coworkers will be helping you through that process, through the MAP process. I see some families that I know. It's good to see you guys here. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'll be here all day.
I'm Christine Piltzecker. I'm here as a parent of, 3 adopted children, 4 in total. 4 children in total. And I actually used to work with Val at Adoption Journeys, and I now work at the Attachment Institute and the Institute for Trauma and Healing.
So, first question we want to throw out to you folks is, when you saw the sign that said, maintaining connections, helping children with connections, was there anything in particular that you folks were hoping to get from this? Because when we talk about connections, what happens is connections can mean a lot of different things. And how do we maintain all those different connections? So we definitely want to be able to answer those questions for you. We want you to be able to leave here with some additional supports. So when we say connections, what comes to mind for you folks?
I immediately thought of biological family and foster parents. You know, if that child was with a foster parent for an extended amount of time, they may need that connection going forward. And how do you maintain that? And how do we work with that to make that happen?
Okay, great. Okay, and that's critical. That's one of the very first connections. That is the first connection. Any child, whether the child's a day old or a child is 5 years old or 12 years old, they all have that connection back to that birth family. What else comes with those connections?
Trust.
Trust, right? Exactly. Fear. Yep. And can you think of other connections we all have? Connections to our culture, connections to our language, connections to the foods we eat, our traditions. It makes up who we are. So maintaining those connections helps with the individual person and the individual child. So we're going to talk about that piece of it. And then another big piece is siblings. Sibling connection, which ties all of that piece in. So, anything else you want to add?
I think even in schools and communities, those are huge connections. I mean, you can, I'm sure, all relay different stories throughout your childhood from, maybe a favorite teacher or maybe a favorite guidance counselor or coach. Sometimes those people have been crucial in shaping who you are, or maybe what you decided to do for a living. Just maintaining those connections for our kids, and just really, I think, having anyone who's a positive person towards your child to maintain that, just that integrity, that there's more than one person that loves me, there's more than one person that cares how I turn out, what kind of person I am. The more people that a child sees that genuinely care about them, I feel better.
So we have a short video that we're going to watch, and it's in siblinghood and adoption, and it talks about those connections. It talks about that. It starts off with the sibling connection and the importance that it plays, but also it talks about the cultural piece of it. It talks about the language piece of it, and we're going to watch that to kind of set the stage for us, and then we're going to be able to have Chris elaborate in regards to a lot of the subjects that are shown in this video, and then hopefully be able to wrap it up and give you some concrete suggestions on ways to incorporate that. So, again, what I always like to say, this training, this workshop is for you guys. Stop us at any point and direct a question to us, and we'll do our darndest to try to answer that for you. Oops, wrong way.
I remember wanting a sibling my whole life, but my two foster brothers ended up leaving, so I didn't know if my little sister was going to stay or not, so we were really cautious. But I got my little sister in the end.
This is my first ever stuffed animal that my sister gave me when I stepped off the airplane. This is my sister handing me the teddy bear when she first met me. I still sleep with it, but don't tell anyone because I'm 22.
How would I describe like the siblings? Crazy, rambunctious, annoying, loving, you know, all the typical words.
I didn't have any dreams of siblinghood. I was doing just fine as an only child.
The first time I joined my brother in our new home, I wouldn't leave his side. I moved over right next to him at the table and ate his macaroni and cheese from the same bowl. We shared everything.
When I was first adopted, I didn't know I had any biological siblings. So to learn at 17 that I had 6 siblings was a shock. I discovered I'm the oldest, the youngest, the only, and the middle in my family.
I have 7 siblings through my biological parents, but then I got adopted, and now I'm essentially an only child. It's lonely sometimes, but it gives me a chance to bond with my mom. We both love comedy shows. We both love to laugh. Anything that makes us laugh, we're happy.
When people ask me about my siblings coming to my family, they seem to often have this fairy tale-ishness idea about it, like it's some sort of Disney story. But there's always a reason why.
Connects in and stuff. So you already started to hear in regards to some of the connections. That connection, you heard one of the girls say that she had 6 siblings,
Yeah.
and then she became an only child. But does that so does that make her an only child or not? So what do you think would be some of the best ways to be able to support this young girl? You know, Chris, I guess maybe at this point, do your children,
We have, I have, like I said, I have one biological child, one adopted from internationally from Korea, and 2 from DCF. And it's hard because what I find is in relation to this, and then I'll get more into my experience as far as maintaining connections, but it's really super hard because these kids, you know, the child went from 6 siblings to an identity in that family, a role in that family. Where are they in the 6? You know, you saw that. I'm an only, I'm a middle, I'm a whatever. And losing that complete identity. And we have, you know, I found that in my family where the 2 children that I've adopted through DCF all have siblings prior to coming to me. One has, let me think, okay, hold on. 3 sisters from the mom, 2 brothers from the dad. So does that mean that she only has our family? Does that mean that she has, you know, that entirety of family? And how do you support that? You know, it's and I'll talk more about the sort of positives and negatives to that because you know, pros and cons as a parent and what that sort of can present, because it is definitely a dance that you have to do to try to maintain so that they understand they still have a role. Their family is different, it's structured differently, they live differently, but they're still somewhere in the family this one, she was in before, but now she also has a different role. So in her family, she was the youngest. Let me think. Before she came to us, to her knowledge, she was the youngest. There's also a younger one that she doesn't know about. And then she came to us and she's still the youngest. So that role hasn't shifted. But, you know, she now has 3 additional siblings to add on to. So when they go to school, what do you say? What do they say? You know, how many brothers and sisters do you have? Do they stick with who they live with? Do they stick with their entirety of family? You know, when you go to a family cookout and they say, oh, who you know, your brothers and sisters, we have my brother this, you know, it's an interesting dance and dialogue that happens with these kids because it's so complex that many of these kids come with. And the shifting in roles and the acceptance of roles and responsibilities, these kids have been moved often from place to place to place to place. So they have not only, you know, their biological family, and then they have the foster family that they were in before, where they may have had 4 other kids in the home, you know, in addition to I mean, I know I'm jumping, I'm sorry, I'm trying to film.
Yeah, no.
Trying to fill this one out. But the son, never mind.
Hold that thought.
I'll hold the thought, and I'll be more organized in a second.
To their family or to their parents, a lot of times that story is really hard, and it can be really hard when it comes into your story. I don't really hear people talk about that part of adoption.
When I first moved in with my brother, I kind of hated him. Eventually, I thought he was pretty cool, but having a complete family, a stable family, was kind of hard for me. We have a passive-aggressive relationship.
I'm passive.
I'm aggressive.
People at school say my brother and I don't look anything alike, and I just say, yeah, long story.
I was 7 when I left the orphanage and came here to meet my mom and my sister, who was 9. I had nothing coming from India, no English. I felt so small. My sister was also adopted from India, but she came when she was 5 months old, so she had a luxurious life with my mom. She had baths and books read. There's baby photos of her everywhere. Such a loving environment her whole life. It's something that I missed out on, so I was really jealous of my sister. My adoption identity is so different from hers.
Some siblings can accept the identity of being adopted, and others push it to the back of their minds. I can't imagine my life without the reality of adoption. Adoption is me.
We were a pretty ordered family until Danielle came in. She liked things a little more changeable. It was a big shift for me.
It was hard coming in at the age of 12. I was used to chaos. I had 5 other siblings, and it was pretty hectic.
I hate conflict and confrontation. It feels stressful to me, whereas Danielle might have felt like she needed some of that. Maybe she even made it her personal goal to cause a little bit of mayhem.
Yeah, that was me.
Your siblings are like this unfiltered voice. How they perceive adoption quickly becomes how you perceive adoption. So my brother said things like, I wish they'd just bring you back. It kind of made me feel like this sort of like commodity with a receipt attached that could be returned at any moment.
The day my sister was supposed to transition into our house, she had a medical emergency and had to go to the hospital. It's happened other times too, and we never know when it will happen. I get anxious a lot. I wasn't prepared to deal with a sibling who had a disability in that way.
Due to past trauma, my sibling would have intense meltdowns. I got angry at my parents because I wouldn't always feel safe in my own home. It's hard to explain what that stress is like on everyone in the household.
My brother, who is also adopted, just doesn't like to be around me. I feel like I'm an only child every day, even though I'm not.
I feel guilty that I've had a good family and support system my entire life, and my sibling hasn't had that. I feel bad that I sometimes respond to him with frustration. My brother's needs take up so much space, so we've all had to put our needs on a back burner.
would you forget a language you spoke for 7 years?
My brothers and I used to speak Spanish, but we don't anymore. I still correct myself in English. English has been really hard for me.
I came from a very poor family, and it was definitely a change when I moved into Aiden's house. I recently moved back in with my birth family, and it's hard going back.
When I first joined my family, it was hard adjustment because there was a big language barrier. I didn't know what the heck my siblings were saying. I felt different from my siblings because they were white. At first, I didn't feel like I was part of family.
Race wasn't really talked about in my family. Both of my parents were white, and that made it hard to have difficult conversations about it. And because my sister and I never learned how to have those conversations, it meant for me that we weren't able to connect about certain things.
In India, darker skinned people are at the bottom of the caste system. My sister has lighter skin, so she's considered prettier than me over there and over here. Growing up, we were surrounded by white people. I had really wished I lived in a more diverse place. I had to come without my biological brother from Ethiopia, and I felt safe because there was another black person, and my brother who was adopted from Burkina Faso. Being of the same race helped me to relate to my brother, even though I didn't understand the language.
My parents are white, my sister is Cambodian, and my brothers and I are Puerto Rican. No one really believes we are family because we are all different races. I shouldn't have to prove that someone is my family.
My brother goes to college in a city, and my parents have to warn him to be careful, which is kind of weird for me because they never had to warn me to be careful, but I'm not a young black man.
There was another girl at the orphanage in India, and we were always together, and we shared all that history, so I called her my sister cousin.
I was lucky to be adopted with my biological sibling. There was someone who wanted me, but not my sister. So if my moms hadn't taken us both, my sister would have gone to a group home. My caseworker fought for us, but social workers are so overloaded they can't fight every battle. It's important to keep siblings together. You're already being taken from your parents, so to be taken away from your siblings makes it even worse. My adoptive parents were going to adopt my other brothers, but they were adopted by a different family. We never saw each other for our birthdays. We had to sneak in phone calls. That was so hard for us. Now, I'm really close to one of these brothers, but back then I didn't think our future would be this way. If I had a magic wand, I would be able to see my little brother without having to deal with the pain of seeing my birth mother.
I have a little guardian angel. It is special to me because it is a connection to my siblings. The people who gave it to me adopted my younger brother and sister. I'm still in contact with them, but I haven't seen them in over a year.
I really liked how my parents included my brother in my adoption process and helped them understand what I had gone through. It definitely eased my transition into the family, and his as well.
Family is messy. This idea that there are 2 parents and 2 kids, and if you don't have that, your family's somehow broken, clinging on to that made things really, really difficult for me. Just embrace the mess.
Me and my brother are not always at each other's throats. We love going to the arcade and playing Jurassic Park.
She likes juicing ladders. When I play with her, she gets really excited. I like photography, so sometimes we do photo shoots together.
My oldest biological siblings grew up in a different home. Despite their hard experiences, they are my heroes and I love them. Because of them, I'm going to college and not letting bad situations hold me down.
When I was younger, my brother and I got into this 2-day argument. Finally, my dad intervened and said, "Look, boys, no matter what happens, you are brothers. When there is no one else, you will have each other. It doesn't matter that you're not blood related. You are the only ones who will ever share that bond."
Just because it's good doesn't mean it's not hard. And just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not really good.
I love having a sibling, especially a younger one, who looks up to me, who develops similar traits as me, to be against their parents when we need to be.
I cherish my sibling, because it means I'm not alone.
Having a sibling with you keeps you grounded.
Having a sibling is like this friend that you never really asked for, but now you can't really imagine your life without them.
Now, stop.
So you might be saying, well, why did we just watch a video on siblings in regards to connections? But as you can see, I think she summed it up, one of them summed it up really nice, is yes, with connections, when you're connecting with birth families, and I know that was one of the things you had talked about, was birth family. When you're bringing in birth family, it can get messy, it can get chaotic, but by embracing that and with the right guidelines can make a difference in who the child is. And that security. I heard you folks back there talk about the fear, security, trust. But by building those connections, helps ground the child. And yes, and we have to stop sometimes and put aside our fears in regards to what's good for the child. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
That's actually a good place to start, because this is where in my mind I was going to go. When we entered we have like I said, my oldest is my biological child, and what's interesting is when some of the things that they touched upon as a parent was also true. I didn't want him to grow up an only child. I wanted him to have the long-term connections of a sibling, because ultimately, I'm going to die, my husband's going to die, and then where is he? And hopefully, I wanted him to be able to have some sort of connection to someone that can share memories, which is why we entered adoption. Now, as this is a long time ago, so don't throw rocks. When I did this, we went overseas, and the reason we went overseas is I wanted absolutely no connection. I'll be completely honest with that. I was terrified of the mess. I was terrified of the influence. I was terrified of court and, no offense, DCF, and all of that in my life. I was, if I'm being completely honest, that was one of my main motivating factors for going overseas. Now, what I have since learned, obviously, and I had an argument with actually somebody used to work in an adoption unit prior to fostering and adopting in-state through DCF. We had a conversation as to what's better, the connection or the non-connection. As a parent, I'll be honest, what's easier is a non-connection. Up front. All right, my daughter came into a very white community, and both parents are white. Very few Asians in her community, in our community. So she struggles in that realm, all right? Language, the entire thing. What struck me, and it wasn't honest to God, and I'm ashamed to say this, until about 4 years ago when our youngest, through DCF, was brought into our home. We were having Christmas. And we were planning Christmas Eve with my in-laws, which was my family, or not my family, my husband's family, but still family, right? Blood relations to my son, all right? Then you have my daughter, who was adopted from Korea, and then the youngest, who had entered our family. We had just come back from visiting her grandmother and her older siblings from her biological family. Struck me Christmas Eve. I'm looking around the house and I'm like, the one person who has absolutely no connection is my daughter from Korea. And how heartbreaking that is, and how wrong I was. Now, would I do it differently and not adopt from there? No, I wouldn't, all right? Would I want to search out greater connections? Yeah, I would, because it's so, everybody else in my family, as it is right now, has connections to biological siblings that they can say, that's who I look like. That's where I came from, all right? Quite stupidly, ignorance is wonderful, felt that, it's going to be less messy. I'm going to get her younger. She's going to be less traumatized. The whole thing that's in the back of your head when you do this. You want less trauma. You don't want to invite chaos into your life. That's what I thought. But since then, knowing that it didn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I just added more chaos to her life. She has absolutely no one to connect to. No one. So she's constantly in search of, trying to find, where do I fit? Okay, we live in one of the towns nearby, and she is constantly gravitating towards, I can't say she was constantly gravitating. She has found her niche in the Asian group. They're all Chinese. She thinks she's Chinese, apparently. Because she's like, I can speak Chinese. I'm like, yeah, Korean. But she's searching for something where she fits. Okay, do I believe that I think she fits with us? Yes. Now, does it get messy? Yes, it gets messy. Okay, our youngest, who is just turned 6, came to us, and as I was trying to explain very poorly, she's the youngest in her mom's, okay, she's not the youngest. She's the second youngest of her mother's biological children, okay? There's one after her that she knows nothing about, and I don't really know anything about, except that she was adopted at birth. And then she has 3 other siblings. 1 that's with her dad, 2 that are with their dad. Okay, so it's messy, okay? Because now we have all of those families now to contend with. We maintain connection through her grandmother, which she cherishes. We see them monthly, we see the siblings monthly, we see the fathers of the siblings monthly, all the time, okay? And she cherishes that. She can, those are her sisters. Now she also has, with her father's family, 2 brothers. We don't see them, okay? Because we have no contact with anything from the dad's family. All right, so at some point that's going to be of interest to her too. Those are also her biological siblings. We have another child that was placed to us after she was adopted 2 weeks later. A little boy who's actually is not finalized yet, but he will be. He's the middle of 5. He's got 2 twin siblings that are with someone else. He has an older brother who's in a guardianship home and an older sister who's aged out of the system. So we try to maintain those connections. That's going to be a little trickier because they have an open adoption agreement, so we are going to maintain those contacts. And I'm up for, as now, having understood what I understand now, I am up for any connection as long as it's healthy. I have no problem with any of it. Is it a pain? Yeah, Yep, it is. It always comes at inconvenient times, but it's not about me. If I want to give them as much as they can, it has to be about them. Because they search. And if you try to make it not about that, they're going to find it anyway. And they're going to find it in places you don't want to find it.
Right.
You know?
If you don't mind me just
Yeah, no,
elaborating.
please. Go on.
And one of the things I wanted to say with what Chris is sharing and what we saw in the video, and going back to what some of you folks have said earlier, is while it seems a little chaotic to coordinate these visits, it seems chaotic to be in touch with the birth family. What you're also doing when you support it, and it will be chaotic in that moment, but the bigger picture is you're helping your child trust in you for that communication. You're gaining so much more from that because they can rely on you to know that you're going to be that support. It's fearful for them, but think about any situation you may have been in, and when it was stressful, what did we do? We turned to those we trusted in order to get us through that scary moment. So if you can build on that trust, you can build on that connection that you have with your child and allowing them to have some type of connection with their birth family. And we don't mean that it has to be visits, every week or every, 6 months. It may mean connections in just being able to talk about their birth family. That is so critical. And being able to connect, having those conversations, as Chris just said, in regards to Christmas time. Tell me your story. Connect me to your birth family. What do you remember? And incorporate that. That's building connections. Bringing in, stuff in regards to the Korean culture. That's connecting. Again, physically not connecting with that birth family, but physically connecting with that culture. We heard the girl in the video talk about the language piece of that. And no, we can't go back and learn a whole new language in order for them, but we can make sure we expose them to that. And I know you've talked about that in the MAP classes. The majority of you have been through MAP, and that's one of the things you talk about. But those are the critical pieces of it.
You celebrate where they come from, and it's really hard because the thing is this: it's like you know, these kids don't get into the system because, you know, somebody just, you know, it's not Daddy Warbucks ever died in a fire and that's it. That's not the way it happens, obviously, through DCF. It happens because of trauma, because of abuse, because of, you know, drug abuse, alcohol, whatever it is. Okay, so it's messy. But maintaining the connections and having an open dialogue, like Val said, and allowing those conversations to happen within your home allows the child to actually draw conclusions of their own. You know, my biggest fear was that there would be an influence from outside on my child. The reality is the kids see what they see and they learn what they learn. It might take a little time. They know and they will learn where they came from. Does it bother me to take my youngest to the area that I take her to? Yeah, it does. Mm-hmm. Do I question who's coming in and out of the house? Yep. Okay. Am I concerned about it? Not while I'm there, I'm not. Okay. So it gets complicated in that way, but I think it's imperative for her to be able to draw the conclusions that this is this life, which was valid, and this is where she, you know, this is where her roots are. They're there, and she has connections. But she also has this other life. And it allows her to be able to sort of figure out who she is and where she fits. Mm-hmm. Now, do I pray that she's not going to lean that way? Of course I do. Mm-hmm. You know, of course I do. It terrifies me. But at the same time, I think the only way she's ever going to figure out who she is and where she came from is by having those connections. Me telling her that, Mom, you know, that you were homeless and you lived in the woods. She's very proud of that, by the way. I just want to say she's very proud. I lived in the woods. I'm like, yeah, you did. You know, you did. And for me, that's heartbreaking. And for anybody else hearing that, that's heartbreaking. But because we've had the open dialogue, it's not shameful. And that's huge. You know, because it's the shame, it's the sad, it's all of that these kids get so bogged down in. Naturally, as would anybody. I mean, we ask these kids to do things that adults can't do. That's what helps them not heal. Yeah.
Do you mind talking a little bit more about how you talk respectfully and kindly about families of origin when there is so much trauma?
I'll refer to the 11-year-old that we have. His biological family have had multiple chances to reunite. He's been in the system since he was 4. Just got placed with us in November. So he's been in and out, in and out, in and out. All of the kids have been in and out. They're inconsistent with visits. They cause stress in the house. I ask him to talk about where he is, and I encourage. We had a good example of this, I think, is at work. We have a Wednesday night family night, so all the workers bring their families, we go out to eat, right? One night he's sitting there, and he's pretty reserved. I mean, he's open, he knows his family has issues. He's very clear on that. He knows he doesn't want to go home. But we were sitting at the dinner table, and we were all sitting around, and everybody had their families, all concoctions, adopted, not adopted, everybody, you know, he wasn't the only adopted or soon to be adopted child there. And he started crying, and I couldn't figure out, I thought something had happened at school that day, so I pulled him aside and I said, you know, what's going on? He goes, I don't want to talk about it. I said, why? And he goes, well, I don't want to hurt your feelings. I said, you're not going to hurt my feelings, you know. I said, just tell me. I said, you know, your own feelings right now are important. And he said to me, he said, you said something the other day, this morning, and you didn't mean, and it wasn't wrong what you said. I said, what did I say? You know, I said we were talking about going out to eat that night, and he was tired. He wanted to play video games. He didn't want to go out to eat. He was tired of going out to eat on Wednesdays. That wasn't what his other family did. And I said, he said, you said, well, you might want to get used, you know, this is what we do as a family. You might want to get used to it. It was off the cuff. It wasn't, this is what we do as a family. That's not what it was. It was just like, well, this is what we do. This is, you know, what we do as a family. This is what we do. And he said, and there was nothing wrong with the thing. He said, but I'm sitting here thinking that I don't know how to feel. And I like being here, and I like being here with you, but I think and I'm like, are you sad that you can't do this with your own family? He said, yes, I should be doing this with my own family. Mm-hmm. He said, with my biological family. He said, I know I can't, but I wish I could, which opened up another whole conversation. I don't know what to call you. I don't know if that's okay. I don't know if it, you know, with me, but also with him. You know, I feel disloyal calling you mom, but I know you are my mom. It's just this whole thing. it opens dialogue. And not getting offended, not being ready to be like, yeah, but, you know. I will weave in things like, you know, he comes from a background where the parents are very systemized, if that makes sense. You know, they get everything, they do nothing. I don't want to say they get everything. They do little, but they get a lot of supports. They get disability because they're alcoholic, which floors me, but that's, you know, whatever. So they collect because they have these struggles. That's fine. But he's of the mindset that I don't have to work. You know, I shouldn't have to work ever. And I'm like, well, you do. Well, my parents didn't. You're right, they didn't. Did you like the way that they lived? No. Would you want more than they had?
How old is he? I'm sorry.
He's 11, just turned 11. He's very...
Shouldn't be working now.
He's odd. You know, he's an odd kid. I mean, he has a tremendous insight, he really does. And he's like, yeah, but I should never have to work. He said, nobody should have to work. I'm like, well then how, you know, so we sort of weave in this thing. I'm like, well, did you like that life? You know, why do you suppose your parents struggled? You know, why do you suppose that you didn't have what your friends had that you wanted? Well, because we didn't have money. Well, why didn't you have the money? You know, what got in the way? So I try to do it that way. It's really hard to bite your tongue. If you know that they're perpetuating stuff that's unhealthy, it's really hard to bite your tongue. You save that for a good friend or a partner. You know.
We're considering adopting siblings, and I don't know if this is the right forum, but I wondered if you could talk about, are siblings placed in foster homes together, and if they aren't, how to accommodate them when they do transition in, if they haven't been living, like if we're adopting 3 kids and they're all in separate foster homes, this sibling connection
isn't there
in regards to having them then live in our house.
If you don't mind. So with that there, what I would suggest, just for all of you, and I think one of you brought it up earlier, is utilize those foster parents. Utilize those foster parents in regards to getting to know your child, that connection. That foster parent has a lot of knowledge. That foster parent has spent a lot of time. So often our foster parents kind of get overlooked. Oh, you watch them for a little bit until they could get to my house. But they are a wealth of knowledge, and utilize them in that transition and spending time with them. And, you know, getting to know your child, you know, transitioning them little by little. So, I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, I guess my question, and it may, I know every case is different, but is it typical for siblings to be placed in a foster home together? Or
idealistically, and I use this expression all the time.
And
so,
we strive for that. We really do
yes.
strive for that, but sometimes it's just the logistics. You know, sometimes a foster mom only takes girls, and here we have 2 girls and a little boy. She can't place a little boy in a room full of girls. So we really, really try hard to do that. I think definitely when you're talking about taking in a sibling group and transitioning into your home, it's amazing that you want to take on siblings. I commend you right from the start from just thinking that way. It's everyone's getting reused to, everyone's relearning new routines. Being flexible, I think, is huge. And I think sometimes as an adoption worker that used to do that, transition siblings into homes, we would sit and talk about how this was going to look. This child's coming on this day, and then you really throw it up in the air and you do something totally different, because we, you know, for example, I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old transitioning into a home. We were going to put in the 2-year-old sooner than the 4-year-old, because we wanted the 4-year-old to finish preschool, figured she needed more time to come into the home, many visits, you know, maybe do an overnight here and there, and then transition slowly. Well, we got to the point, probably a month in, the 2-year-old just started living there. They were living separately originally. The 4-year-old was sobbing when we went to leave and bring her back to the foster home. She didn't understand, why can the baby stay, but I have to go. So once we saw that that wasn't any longer a positive thing, we shut it down. We said, well, let's slide this way up. Let's have her move in quicker. We don't want this doing any damage to her, like she thinks they prefer the baby over her. We didn't want any of that. We were just trying to do it slow. They were willing to have it be over a series of months. Wanted her to be very familiar and comfortable with them. And we changed it completely as it went. So being flexible as to how it goes, you know, knowing You got little ones coming in, you might need daycare, they're gonna need after school care, like planning, that kind of stuff. But like I said, I think being flexible on what the child needs as well is huge. Some kids, they think they wanna have these big rooms, separate spaces, they don't always want to. They sometimes wanna be together, they wanna be in the same bedroom, if it's possible, having that option.
I would get to your question. And what I like to throw out there is, you know, idealistically, it should look this way. Realistically,
Well,
you know, stop and saying to ourselves, idealistically, realistically. You know, it's really important.
Yeah, just like you know, like the connection to the foster. We're looking at a situation where, also sibling situation, and one of the foster parents is a Spanish-speaking family that the mom doesn't speak any English, and this girl who is Caucasian, came from an English-speaking background, was placed there, and so it's going to be hard for us. My Spanish is very rough around the edges, like you know, like, and then so it always has to go through an interpreter, and so if you have this like, oh, tonight I just really need to hear, you know, why is she behaving this way? Am I missing a clue? Like you want to talk to the foster, like that must, like, we're kind of like, okay, how's that gonna work out?
There's an app for that. I just want to say that there is actually an app for that, which works really well with some of our foster parents.
Well, I think it's too. Sometimes in situations like the 11-year-old, he, you know, his foster mother gave notice. She didn't want him anymore. Okay, and it was him, not the rest of the family. It was him. So it was like she didn't really want to have the contact. So you do the best with what you have. Yeah. The other thing too is, as much as you try to keep siblings together, I know DCF, that's a big push. Sometimes they're not together for a reason.
Right.
You know, because they have those roles that may have not have been healthy. You know, and for them to heal more effectively, they are separated. So, I mean, we could talk for hours. You know, my biological son is not thrilled to have 3 younger siblings right now, particularly the 11-year-old. So you have to share space. You know, it's definitely a dance, and it's a learn as you go often.
Yeah. Unfortunately, okay, go ahead.
So your biological son, when you were first having the girl come into the house, did you talk to him, or was he old enough?
He was 4, and he was extremely excited.
He was extremely excited.
He was.
Okay.
Yeah, because our 5-year-old is like the same.
Very, very excited.
What's going to happen with her?
But that changed?
Well, as he's 15, so that kind of speaks for itself. He's 15, yeah, he doesn't like anybody. But no, it's his space. He's not pleased, and you know what? Honestly, I would have loved to have a sibling come in and talk, because he doesn't like the connections that we're maintaining with the family. He doesn't think it's healthy. He doesn't think it's helpful. He doesn't think, you know, but he's coming from the lens of it's scary. Okay, and he doesn't understand the benefits. Right. He's terrified for what that's going to look like.
Unfortunately, they're telling us we have to wrap up, so I just want to, you know, quickly say, you know, sometimes we have to take a step back and say, whose need is it? Is it my need, or is it the child's need? And looking at it from that perspective in regards to those connections for our children. The other thing too is there's some handouts over there, 2 different handouts. One talks about the bond of siblings. The other talks about the 5 experienced moms talking about drug addiction to their child, talking about visits with a mom that's homeless, and it gives you that perspective. I think those are really great handouts. One other tool that I think could be really helpful, because we want to go back, as Chris was saying, you know, give them help them fill in their narrative. It's their story. They lived it. We're not pouring salt in their wound when we revisit and talk about the fact that her daughter lived in the woods. She's already done that, and she survived it, and she knows that. So when we talk about it, we're not pouring salt in the wound, we're helping clarify. So one of the other really great tools is, if they haven't already talked to you about, is life books. Going back and either you working with them with life books, or with a therapist that can, or their adoption worker, helping them fill in those. By filling in their narratives, helps them with their past connections. And their past connections is what made them who they are today. So the best of luck with your onward journey.
I just want to add in really quick. I think connections can look different to different people. I think people sometimes are fearful of the visit. They're physically worried about seeing biological mom or biological dad. I think you can still go back to old-fashioned mail. They can mail a paper they did. They can mail, you know, like we talk about in math. They can mail that 100 that they got in math. Finally, you know, maybe that's a big accomplishment for them. They can mail it coloring pages, letters, certificates, copies, email, you know, pictures exchanged, something like that as well. But just I think even if it's just with a foster parent, to reach out and say, hey, listen, I'm doing really good in my new home.
And one of the other things I'm just going to throw in there, when you do that, it's interesting because when you build a relationship with the biological family, you find out what they want and don't want also.
Right.
We gave pictures, we had taken, our youngest son, and I'll shut up, but we had taken her to Disney this last year, this before they were finalized, and the mom was struggling, and we brought pictures. I wanted her to have pictures, you know, but that was incredibly hard for her, for what she can't do. And I said, you know, you let me, she goes, no, I want them, but you know what I mean, it's a dance. It is a dance. It's figuring it out.
Well, thank you so
Good luck.
much. Very helpful.